In the short history of our country, the United States has risen to global military dominance. Yeah, I said it. Come at me, China. But the road to the top was paved with the blood of good men and women. Looking back, there are some pivotal battles we remember with solemn pride and a little bit of hoo-rah. Let's check out 10 of the most intense battles in United States history. We'll kick this off with number 10 on our list, the Battle of Chosin. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir was one of the most defining battles of the Korean War and the stuff of legend in the Marine Corps. In the fall of 1950, UN forces under the command of General MacArthur had almost captured the entirety of North Korea when they were attacked by thousands of Chinese communist soldiers. The US was forced to retreat, and by mid-November, the 1st Marine Division and elements of the 7th Infantry Division found themselves outnumbered, surrounded, and at risk of annihilation in the high North Korean mountains at the Chosin Reservoir. Their only way out was a fighting retreat back to the coast. Although, as Chesty Puller put it, they weren't retreating, they were fighting in the opposite direction. Over the course of the next 17 days, the Marines and soldiers fought the Chinese, in bouts of frostbite, with fierce determination and epic endurance. They broke through the enemy's encirclement and even rebuilt a bridge the Chinese destroyed using pre-built bridge sections dropped by the US Air Force. By the end of the battle, the US Marines suffered 836 dead and roughly 10,000 wounded. The Army had 2,000 dead and 1,000 wounded. The Chinese had the most catastrophic losses. 6 out of their 10 divisions were wiped out, and only 1 would ever see combat again. Although exact numbers are unknown, historians estimate that anywhere between 30,000 and 80,000 Chinese were killed. Although technically a loss for the Marines, the Battle of Chosin Reservoir lives on in memory as an example of the Marine fighting spirit and the ability to find strength even when the odds are stacked against them. Number 9, the Battle of Antietam. A year and a half into the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln needed a Union victory. He finalized the Emancipation Proclamation during the summer, but his cabinet feared it would be too difficult to enforce after a string of Northern losses, including the Second Battle of Bull Run. Lincoln charged Major General George B. McClellan with the defense of Washington, D.C. against Confederate General Robert E. Lee's first invasion of the North. Earlier in the month, Lee divided his men, sending General Thomas Stonewall Jackson to capture Harper's Ferry. Following Jackson's success, Lee decided to make a stand in Maryland at Antietam Creek. After 2 days of posturing, fighting began early in the morning on September 17, 1862, and lasted well past sundown, with staggering casualties on both sides and no ground gained. The next day, both armies gathered their dead and wounded, and Lee retreated south. It was the bloodiest one-day battle in American history, with 23,000 casualties from both sides and nearly 4,000 dead. Sticking with the Civil War, let's move on to number 8, the Battle of Gettysburg. The Battle of Gettysburg was not only the largest battle of the Civil War, it remains the largest battle ever fought in North America. Confederate General Robert E. Lee had just won a decisive victory against Union General George Meade's Army of the Potomac in Virginia. Wanting to capitalize on the recent victory, Lee led his troops on a second invasion into the northern states to defeat the Union on their own soil, and hopefully gain recognition of the Confederacy by European countries. General Meade's Army of the Potomac pursued Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, and the two forces met near Gettysburg on July 1, 1863. The Confederates outnumbered the Yankees at roughly 30,000 to 18,000. By the end of the first day, the Yankees were forced to retreat through town to Cemetery Ridge and Culp's Hill. By then, both sides had gained reinforcements. Meade now had roughly 94,000 soldiers in a fishhook formation, allowing him to successfully move troops from one front to another. Lee, meanwhile, had roughly 72,000 soldiers wrapped around that fishhook. The Confederates attacked first, but at the end of the second day, the Union defense lines held strong. On the third day, Lee tried an aggressive attack to crush the Federals. He sent General Pickett with approximately 12,500 men to crush the Union Army with a direct charge. It turned out to be one of Lee's most ill-fated decisions. 50% of Pickett's men were wounded or killed, and the rest of his troops were forced to retreat. On July 4th, Lee and his men waited for the Yankees to attack, but they didn't. That night, the Northern Army of Virginia began its retreat back to the south. His train of wounded men stretched 14 miles long. Lee's greatest opportunity became his greatest failure, and his hopes of European recognition for the Confederacy and a quick end to the war were dashed. Casualties were high on both sides. The Union suffered around 23,000 casualties, while the South suffered 28,000, more than a third of Lee's army. The battle was the deadliest in the Civil War and prompted Lincoln's iconic Gettysburg Address 4.5 months later at the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery. Although the fighting continued for nearly 2 more years, Gettysburg was an irrevocable turning point in the war in the Union's favor. Number 7. Huế City during the Vietnam War. The North Vietnamese captured the venerated capital city of Huế as part of the Tet Offensive, a coordinated series of attacks on over 100 American and South Vietnamese positions countrywide. The battle to regain Huế began in February 1968 and lasted nearly a month, as Marines ferociously drove North Vietnamese and Communist Viet Cong forces from the city. The Perfume River divided the city of Huế in two. To the north was the Citadel, a 3-square-mile fortress surrounded by walls 30 feet high and up to 40 feet thick, with a moat on 3 sides and the river on the 4th. To the south, the smaller and more modern section of Huế was connected to the Citadel by a bridge. U.S. Marines and soldiers were tasked with clearing out the entrenched enemy in the southern portion of the city, while the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, or ARVN, would clear out the northern portion and the Citadel. Untrained for urban combat, U.S. battalions had to come up with tactics and techniques on the spot, while facing a brutal enemy. The process was methodical, time-consuming, and casualty-heavy. They went from house to house and room to room to gain ground. Speed, surprise, and shock were essential to achieve victory. After clearing the south side, U.S. battalions broke into the Citadel from the bridge to assist ARVN troops. Finally, on February 24th, the South Vietnamese flag flew over the Citadel. On March 2nd, the longest sustained infantry battle the war had seen to that point was officially declared over. Casualties were high on both sides. The U.S. suffered 216 dead, 1,364 wounded. South Vietnamese losses totaled 384 dead, with 1,830 wounded. And thousands of civilians were caught in the crossfire or murdered. The North Vietnamese casualties included 5,000 dead and countless more wounded. Virtually all of Huế was destroyed, leaving roughly 100,000 homeless. While technically a win for the US and South Vietnamese, the news coverage of the event shocked the American population and broke their faith in the war. US troops would not experience that intensity of urban fighting again for another 36 years, until the Second Battle of Fallujah, which is number 6 on our list. The Second Battle of Fallujah was the bloodiest battle American troops fought in the entire Iraq conflict, and the deadliest battle for the Marine Corps since Huế City in 1968. From November through December 2004, a joint American, British, and Iraqi government offensive fought to clear the insurgents from their Anbar province stronghold. An estimated 4,000 enemy combatants were in the city when the fighting began. It's even suspected that Al-Qaeda terrorist Abu Musab al-Zarqawi held his headquarters there. They fortified their defenses before the attack, preparing spider holes, traps, and concealed IEDs throughout the town. They created propane bombs hidden in buildings, cut off access to escape routes and roofs, and designed fields of fire where they believed coalition forces would maneuver. Nearly 70% of the civilian population fled the city, reducing civilian casualties and allowing coalition forces to launch their assault. Army, Marine, and Iraqi forces attacked with an air barrage, followed by an insertion of Marines and Navy Seabees, who bulldozed obstacles. The worst of the fighting continued for the first week, but insurgents resisted throughout the 6-week campaign. By the end of December, 82 U.S. troops were killed, with another 600 wounded. British and Iraqi forces sustained 12 killed, with another 53 wounded. Over 2,000 insurgents were killed, while another 1,200 were captured. Keeping with post-9/11, let's talk about Afghanistan. Specifically, number 5 on our list, the Battle of Sangin. The Battle of Sangin was one of the deadliest campaigns in Operation Enduring Freedom. The Sangin River Valley was a Taliban stronghold and was considered the center of opium production. In 2010, United States Marines replaced the British forces in Sangin and initiated a deadly campaign to clear out the insurgent presence in the region. The counterinsurgency lasted for 4 years, and during this time, Marines sustained casualties at some of the highest rates seen during the 17-year conflict in Afghanistan. IEDs peppered the landscape, killing or maiming hundreds. During the height of the fighting, there was daily contact with the enemy just meters outside Allied FOBs. In October 2010, 3rd Battalion 5th Marines began a 7-month tour that would kill dozens of them in action and injure hundreds more, with at least 34 of them becoming single, double, or triple amputees. But the Dark Horse Marines made progress, extending their security perimeter and clearing Highway 611, which allowed for the transportation and operation of future units. By 2012, Sangin was transformed from a battlefield into a thriving rural town, but the price was over 100 British and American lives lost and hundreds more wounded. The Taliban never fully released their hold on Sangin, and today the area remains in contention. Number 4 on our list is the only air-to-air fight we'll cover. It's decidedly less deadly than any other battle here, but the tactics and implications merit a discussion. So, let's talk about Operation Bolo, the biggest air battle in the Vietnam War, and one of the most successful ambush actions in military history. In the last months of 1966, the North Vietnamese Army's MiG-21 fish bed had become more active and successful at intercepting the F-105 Thunder Chief formations of the United States Air Force. The F-105 Thuds were supersonic fighter bombers with the mission of destroying communist air defense systems. They did this in the role of the Wild Weasels, a group that would fly slow and low enough to bait the communist surface-to-air systems into targeting them, thus giving away the enemy position and allowing the Wild Weasels to attack and destroy. But with the MiG-21 added to the fight, the Thuds were falling vulnerable to air-to-air attacks. The U.S. Air Force decided they needed to neutralize the MiG threat. Air Force legend and World War II ace Colonel Robin Olds designed a gutsy plan to accomplish this. Known as Operation Bolo, the mission was to lure the enemy MiGs into battle by hiding supersonic F-4C jets among the slower and less maneuverable Thud formations. On January 2, 1967, Olds and his formation of Phantoms took to the cloudy skies to fly the F-105 bomb run. They kept to the F-105 speed and flew in the F-105 formation. The NVA took the bait and engaged. Popping up from the clouds, the fish beds attacked in pairs. Olds and his formation began a legendary dogfight, where U.S. forces exploited their tactical and technical advantage over the enemy. Within 13 minutes, 7 MiGs were destroyed, roughly half the NVA MiG-21 fleet. The Americans hauled ass back to Thailand with 0 casualties. In the next week, similar missions took out more communist aircraft. As a result, the North Vietnamese were forced to ground their aircraft for several months as they retrained their pilots and sought new air defense tactics. Colonel Olds remains the only U.S. Air Force ace with victories in both World War II and Vietnam. To illustrate how terrible it can be when our birds are shot down, number 3 on our list is Mogadishu. On December 9, 1992, 1,800 United States Marines arrived in Mogadishu, Somalia to help effect peace in the war-torn country. As part of Operation Restore Hope, the Marines supported international aid workers in the country for humanitarian aid operations, including food and supply distribution. In 1993, President Bill Clinton reduced the U.S. presence as the United Nations formally assumed responsibility for operations. In June, however, Pakistani UN peacekeepers were ambushed by militias loyal to Somali warlord General Mohammed Farah Aidid, and 24 UN soldiers from Pakistan were killed. In response, the UN authorized the arrest of Aidid, and President Clinton dispatched 160 Army Rangers and Delta Force operators on a mission to capture the warlord and other leaders of his militia. The operation went disastrously wrong. The first Black Hawk was struck by an RPG, killing the pilot and co-pilot in the crash, and injuring 5 more passengers, including one who would die later from his wounds. A rescue mission retrieved the rest of the survivors, but then the second Black Hawk was struck, killing 3 in the crash. Pilot Mike Durant survived, but his back and leg were broken, and he was taken prisoner. 2 Delta Force operators, Gary Gordon and Randy Shugart, were killed attempting to rescue Durant, who was held prisoner for 11 days until his release was secured through diplomatic negotiations. Gordon and Shugart would be posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for their actions. President Bill Clinton immediately ordered the withdrawal of American troops from Somalia, and other UN countries followed suit, leaving the region unstable and without a functioning government. Moving on, let's talk about World War II, a conflict where military fatalities were estimated between 50 and 80 million. Number 2 on our list is Iwo Jima. In the final stretch of World War II, the Allies sought to gain control of strategic islands in the Pacific. Iwo Jima was a barren Pacific island located roughly 660 miles from Japan, making it an ideal forward-deployed location for the Allies and Axis powers alike. On February 19, 1945, after 3 days of naval and aerial bombardments which launched over 6,800 tons of bombs and 22,000 shells, the first wave of United States Marines stormed Iwo Jima's volcanic shores. Over 21,000 Japanese were there to greet them, heavily entrenched in a complex network of underground tunnels and artillery positions. What followed was some of the most violent fighting of the Pacific in World War II, due in large part to the determination of the Japanese to die before they would surrender. The Japanese burned any vegetation that might have provided U.S. Marines with cover, then launched artillery fire at the Marines' exposed locations. Naval Seabees got to work on U.S. artillery positions, forward command posts, and field hospitals, all while holding their own in the fight. The iconic raising of the American flag over Mount Suribachi took place 4 days into the battle, but the fighting continued for a month. Marines used artillery and flamethrowers to destroy enemy defenses, and the final battle on March 26th included a massive attack against the Americans that ultimately came down to hand-to-hand combat. In the end, nearly all of the Japanese defenders were killed, except for a couple hundred prisoners. 6,000 Americans died helping to take the island, with 17,000 more wounded. Finally, number 1, ranked for its intensity, carnage, and outcome, D-Day. D-Day was the largest air, land, and sea operation undertaken to date, and a logistics marvel. One of the most important battles in World War II, it turned the tide of the conflict in the Allies' favor and eventually led to their victory in Europe. The original invasion date was set for May, but due to poor weather conditions, it was postponed until June. Despite the continued poor weather, Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces General Eisenhower gave the order to attack. D-Day would commence on June 6, 1944. On Eisenhower's orders, roughly 176,000 troops embarked on their journey from England to France on 6,000 landing craft, ships, and other vessels. Just before midnight, airborne troops parachuted into occupied France, surprising the Germans. Air and naval bombardments were underway to weaken the German defenses before the main invasion began. At 6:30 a.m., land insertions struck across 5 sectors in a 60-mile coastal stretch of Normandy. British and Canadian troops overcame light opposition to capture Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches, as did the Americans at Utah. But the American GIs at Omaha faced a tough fight. The aerial and naval bombardment had done little to diminish the heavily fortified German defenses, both on the shore and on the cliffs above the beaches. Allied amphibious tanks were launched too far from shore, and only 2 out of the 29 made it to the beach. Many soldiers drowned in the waves, dragged down by the weight of their rucksacks, and many more were mowed down by the constant German fire. Small groups of Americans managed to make it across the beach and traverse up the cliffs. Allied casualties on June 6th have been estimated at 10,000 killed, wounded, and missing in action, consisting of 6,600 Americans, 2,700 British, and 946 Canadians. By the end of the day, 155,000 Allied troops successfully stormed and held Normandy's beaches. By August 21st, the Allies had successfully landed over 2 million men in northern France and suffered 226,386 casualties. German losses included over 240,000 casualties and 200,000 captured. Between 13,000 and 20,000 French civilians died, and many more were seriously wounded. The success of the invasion was the beginning of the end of the war in Europe. It forced the Germans to fight a 2-front war with the Soviets on the east, and US, British, and Canadian forces on the west. The Nazi Third Reich would fall the following May. So join in this conversation and let us know which battles you think should make our next list. Also, don't forget to hit that thumbs up and make sure you subscribe.